누구래가? 나 시바 인상. Bollendoji John Gilda Lama Karmapa, Kindle Queen Sisi Damnadroma, Chile Queen Jivo, Chigun Beji Chandela, Nandra Siji, Gubid, Termi, Tuji, Gumora, also Semjan Tom Jiggy, Lucha, Dora, Jingy, Lotus, Chilam, the Dora, Jingy, Lotus. Tam Chuba Sura Jingi Labdus, Chuba Yeshe Chawara Jingi Labdus. Last of time, I get Namgyal Tadan in the Simjin Tamji, Koa Dungi Gigato Little Dinankin Lanami, Kohonda, Pervert Cha, the Chedu, Tambe Chela, Tesum, Gomsum Gikone, Chuburkio, Nyambe, Kunong Chanchi Chodu. To give a certain ambitious and pursue.
To free all beings, my kind mothers, infinite as space, from this ocean of suffering that is samsara, and establish them in the unsurpassed state of omniscience, Buddhahood, I shall listen, contemplate, and meditate on the Dharma. With this perfectly pure motivation of bodhicitta, please listen to the genuine Dharma.
Chegel Tabulaje Sung Tabuchi Shi Le Tangbo Lo Chusudo Shebekap.
Of all the possible topics in the Dharma to which we could be listening, our topic is the 4 Dharmas of the Dharma King, Gampopa. And of these 4, we're working with the first, turning the mind to Dharma.
Indeed, Lo Chusudo said it in Kasan Shibanashi, said Digi Punso Tadala Shembating Lo. Any Tambeche Kuna Tundinirwa Chini Chima Pinchigi Davidin 담배치 쿠나 던전이로와 던전이로 제마 마임바 솔와 메바라 개와디 로체스 도아스
As I explained previously, when one has from the very depths overturned the fixated reification of all of the abundance and prosperity of this life, and instead turned to accomplish Dharma alone in all our doings, with this very deep-seated understanding to gain the aim of contentment and happiness in future rebirths. This mindset that urgently seeks these states in a way that is not fabricated and totally effortless in its arising is what is called the mind turning to Dharma.
다 데르베 아니 로치스 도아디 이제 하장기 계신 뭐 김생 거래라는데니 당부에 치마숨 최 남도 도와던 남기 추바서와던 추바의 시스처와 숨디 아니 이 자와양 로치스 도아들에 디메나 최 치마숨 이 냠는 아니 용 미스바레 디엔디드니 디 로치스 도아디드니 셀롱바 셀롱바지요나 세등 덴바지요나 데니 다구시 치마숨디양 녀버도 마용에 라와요 말이다 다구시 치마숨 냠는 길라 맥게베 라와요 말이야 이제 돌드나 다구치 치마숨기 아니 규 디 로치스 도아 당보들에 규면은 대부 중미서 봐라 규연은 대부 미용하면서 봐라 디 그렇게 되어라 어떤 인사들이 로치스 도아디 개치셔
Turning the mind to Dharma is of utmost importance. Why is that? Because the later three Dharmas of the four Dharmas of Gampopa, the Dharma becoming the path dispelling delusion, and delusion arising as wisdom, have as their root source this first Dharma, mind turning to the Dharma. Without mind turning to the Dharma first, the later 3 points of the four Dharmas will not arise in our experience. Those practices will have no possible basis for occurring. That basis is the mind turning to Dharma. When we have that authentically in a fully qualified way, then it's impossible that the other three Dharmas will not arise. We are powerless to keep them from occurring if the mind has already turned to Dharma. Briefly put, the mind turning to Dharma is the cause for the other three Dharmas of Gampopa occurring. Without that cause, it's impossible to attain the result. And if we have that cause, it's impossible that the result will not arise. This is why the first of the four Dharmas, mind turning to Dharma, is of utmost importance.
Hola. 디에다 데르버 로치스 도아디 이니 케베 탑디 가상공도 시번하지 데니 치와 메다바 콤바 연송기 동안함 예미 콤바 아니 렌레 콤바 콤바숨 디 라테네 이니 단데시번하시 기 로치스 도아디 연구거래 이다버디 세디기 부도 통제라 인본매가 통교학계 연성기님이 검 이니 슬람매가시 디 디고 미게 대부인벌 렌델라 이세키 데니 디 랑규 디르봉의 송기 규르규의 디바디 랑기 규라 따라 창여봐 신네 다시 디바디 모장나 연송도 깽이 봐 셰베고니 지식다고 로케 디콤바디 라테네 렌데레 이체 투모마이 버게게 디카수 되는 세대 분서 탐절의 심벌로네 담배치 코나 던던이라디 던던이별로 아니 직담 과담 마인바 뇨아 제모 마인밤 대양되네 졸업 배술 제목을 봐 게트버디 연구하래 디버도 나도 가장 시작하라
I've already explained previously the methods for developing this mind that turns to Dharma, namely the 3 meditations consisting of meditation on impermanence with respect to our own mortality, the sufferings and deficiencies of negative realm rebirths, and karmic causality. When we contemplate and meditate on these, as I explained previously, these methods yield the mind turning to Dharma. What happens is we have this recollection of our mortality present to mind, which leads us to understand that even the abundant things of this life have no essential core to them. They're evanescent. And that there is the possibility of undergoing the sufferings of negative realm rebirths. That leads us to have confidence in karmic causality, that particular causes lead to their corresponding results. When we develop this completely in our mind stream, we have this wholesome fear of taking on a negative realm rebirth, which in turn fuels our confidence in karmic causality in an extraordinary way. We're extremely confident in the ability of karmic causality to overturn negative realm rebirths. This, in addition to overturning the fixated attachment, reification of the goodness that we encounter in this life, is what allows us to turn the mind urgently towards accomplishing Dharma, absolutely everything that we do. This is one understanding, this mindset that is not mere words, it's not a mere intellectual understanding, but an experiential understanding that is not fabricated and is effortless in its arising. This is what I have explained until now, the methods and the measure for the mind turning to Dharma.
Hola, tiene que dar, anda lende combatang, any lende combatang, Yansung Nimi combatang, Chiwamidava combat Sumdua. But the Gumdigas, Chiwamidava combati, not to Mangchwala, Chitaki Chitaki Guere. Then Yansung Nimi combating, Chitaki Guera. But the in the Chita needy Comgoedi Gimson Garre Lanatini, Maranto Mangchawa Gisamnadi, Dagas Chitaki Sidure, some year, Dungal Tilatini Dungal Mambu Yungu some year. In a anda, said the Midaba Imbo Gomni Chitaki di Sulniera. Chitaki Sulchikari Lanatini, said the Shinja Chimbo Yudigasu. Se digi nelu longjo dan dal dogu samde gasu dalwa chiwa midaba gumdi gasu deni se digi nelu longjo dan se digi ani nin lu longjo dan dalwa thongdi ani tela shincha shuk chimbo yongyendi di gasu juda gegira karan daldo yemara shincha shuk chimbo yedi deni chiwa di gumdi gasu di gasu dal dogu samde gasu deni tela komdo meba komela deni juda gedu gasu tela gomde meba charu gro dijedo mangchewa ngso dini 치워미다 보고 메들라다 대밤에 차도 거라 디도 애니 치와를 직접 기술이 양다바 말해서 디 거래들은 니리 농조를 창구에 온게 끼고 알아 직다디 이 직다 끼네 팽기 말아 그래서 직접 끼네 시고 그래 막기네 시고 그래 되니 그래서 직접 끼기도 있으니 이그노르 제네 치와미다 보면 매번이 자기 말해 디 이거서 디 직접이 그거 말했습니다 편바요 말 니리 농조든 달도고도 쓰니 직접 끼네 달에 매번 차야나 편바 찍으러 어디 인지 것들이 직접 끼네 양 달기를 직접 막이네 신에 달고 그래 디 뭐비랑 시대 디 액셉트 그래 당그런 처음이다 보다 따여 뭐마디 그랬으나 김sen된 nemba 처음이다 보고 검디가서 아니 시와디 마시was어요 여머레들라 따여 여머레디 이네 시외 내가서 드릭 매봐 드릭 로바 제네 시와디라 따고래 들 김sen여 고바여래 그러지는 델라 따나 단 내 미세들랑 또 드릭하고 제야기 아니 꿀맛차 그래 다릭 매바서는 겨우 마두버제 시에들어 다릭 로버제스는 미세디 고숨 미게발라 콜네시나 다릭 로바라 인송도에 규러 어디 있는 것들은 간소 가상 인송 단레 아니 렌데니 검지거수 아니 겨우 제목 인송디 세디기 되부러 디디들이 겨우 제목 인송디 규디 그런 세디기 융아 인송기 잡아들어 세 디기 류가 이승기 자와디 미게발라송나 디 데부 겨와 처망연 송로 인자다 년송래 직작게 데레 달고구도 섬적어서 달베 규디 세 디기드네 류가 이승기 자와들에 인자 류가 이승기 자와디 미게발라 마송아 농마된도 말아봐 개발라도 제구도 섬데 섬로도 끼어거라 디 지도드네 처음이다고 주다 고민게 되라다 디 처음이다 주다 검거해야 되더니 디버 빵롱 매봐 개와 두롱 매봐 되니 지는 것을 드릭 매봐지 시소나 이 주다기 내로 어딜 주다 깨고래요 손다 깨고야 그 김생각에서 깨나 팬도요래 그래라나더니 시외 가서 강계 팽기미도 팬바디 치어코나래도 디인자더니 미세들라 치어코나 두고도 삼배 삼로디 직다 될라더니 기기라
When we're considering these three meditations, the meditations on karmic causality, on the defects of a negative realm rebirth, and the impermanence in the form of our own mortality, both the meditations on our mortality and the deficiencies of negative realm rebirth, each can give rise to a kind of fear. They are fearsome meditations. And often we will have this impression of, oh, you know, I'm not going to do those because if I do those meditations, I get afraid and any number of different kinds of painful or uncomfortable situations arise. So I don't want to do that meditation. But that's not actually what's meant by meditating on the impermanence in the form of mortality of this life. If you think about it, there are actually two ways that this meditation can engender a fear. One of them is that when we consider mortality, the fact that this life is impermanent and that we're certain to die, and we have a very powerful attachment, a very strong obsession with the things of this life, be it this body, our loved ones, our possessions, our wealth, that very strong attachment, when we think that we have to be parted from all of that, gives rise to a very powerful fear. We don't want to be parted from these things, yet we have to. And that's a very fearful state. And due to not wanting to experience that discomfort, we think, oh, I don't want to do that meditation. And that's the main reason why this meditation is not one that is on the hit list for most people. So the difficulty with that is that's not actually what's meant by the wholesome fear that comes from meditating on the impermanence in the form of mortality. That's a fear that arises on the strength of attachment, craving. There's no benefit to that. Whether you have that fear or not, whether you go there or not, you're going to die either way. You're going to be separated from all of these things that you have this amazing attachment to. And if you ignore that, it doesn't change anything. This kind of fear is useless. It doesn't actually benefit, and it's not what's intended when we speak of meditating on the impermanence in the form of mortality in this life. That kind of fear is born of our attachment, our craving to hold on to our bodies, our loved ones, our possessions. It's a futile fear. Whether we have it or not, the thing that we fear will come at the time of death. That much we have to accept. What is meant by in a genuine meditation on the impermanence of this life is one that's reasonable. There's a reasonable basis. A wholesome fear is one that is reasonable in character and actually serves a purpose. This is one where the fear is not so much directed at the fact that we're going to die. That's going to happen either way. This is a wholesome fear that serves the purpose of saying what I have to fear is dying without preparation at all, or dying with the wrong preparations. That's the wholesome fear that this meditation on mortality is going for. It's a wholesome fear because it has a purpose to it, there's a rationale for it, and there's a benefit to it. What is that? Why is this reasonable? If we see this, then seeing that actually making preparations for our death is a positive thing. That wholesome fear is actually prompting us to prepare for death and also to prepare properly. To face death without preparations, or worse, having made the wrong preparations, pursuing only the things of this life and generating the causes that lead to a negative realm rebirth, that's something to fear. But this meditation on the impermanence of this life, connected with karmic causality, and that understands that the results of a positive rebirth in future lives depends on the causes we bring together in our activities of body, speech, and mind in this life, that is a wholesome fear. It leads us to understand as well that any non-virtuous activities of body, speech, and mind serve as the causes for taking rebirth in the negative realms, and that neutral activities don't actually benefit us as causes for positive future rebirths. All of these together lead to the mindset that urgently seeks to accomplish virtuous actions alone through body, speech, and mind. And that is the purpose served by this meditation on the impermanence of this life, giving rise to the wholesome fear to avoid negative consequences in future lives. This is what points us to engaging in virtuous action. This wholesome fear serves a purpose. There's a benefit to holding that wholesome fear to heart. It's what actually allows us to see that at the time of death, only Dharma will be of benefit, and that unless we accomplish the Dharma by engaging in virtuous activities and so forth, that benefit of future lives will not come. This is why this wholesome fear is of value when we meditate on the impermanence of this life in an authentic way.
Hola. 먼저 인류 롱죄라 착비 원기 애니 치와라 타바디여라 디 치와라 타바디 인류 롱죄라 착비 원기 치와라 타바디더니 김세여 말에 그거여 말에서 디 치와라 치와 아니 섬줄 치질로 말해 김생 거래에서 김세 매비 아니 출 거래라나 다 인류 롱죄라 착비 원기 치와라 타겐디 먼저 께 류디 상고임버시 치와디 냠바임버시 지리 상겐드시네 치와디 산단의 수 7월의 수 영화로 선호던 거라 오늘 전에 말아 치와디 나랑서더니 니 류이세 신차 계획이 류디기 랑신로 류디 끼디니 치외 랑신도 들어라 저 치와세 직수로마디 류디기 랑신로 제돈 류라 치와라 따고디 뭐니 김세 놀아라 치와디 7월의 수중화 말아 류 그런 당고 기준이 시외랑 신도 들어가라 이제 치와디 류디 그런 신들마다 먼저 sagjen 일링이 풍부 되게 랑신들마다 어디니 류디 상고인 거지 치와디 년바디 7월의 수중화로 이 현달의 수중화로 선로 당고라 이 말에 이제들이 치와디 달탑 매버 빵탑 매버도 거르전이라면 류코랑이 랑신로 그래서 류코랑이 랑신 마이나 빵탑 얘기래 저도 류코랑이 랑신이 뭐하고는 류를 신차도 그러 이 돈은 델레데니 치와라 딱바도 용마라 액셉트 그러 치와디 딱고에 그래 열라면 세딜 류를 차 아니 롱제라 차 디니 라테니 뉴몽고 왕도도 애니 디과사 데네제네 애니 겨와 살로마중 치와 딜랩서나 데니 겐송 드라이마도 미도 디니 겐송도 도나 데니 동을 첨부래도 삼네타나 이 딱바디 데니 김센데 데바레스 딱고거래
When we develop this unreasonable fear of death, the one that is based on strong craving and attachment for the body of this life, the loved ones and friends, the wealth, the possessions, and so forth, this is a pointless fear. There's no reason for it. There's no purpose served by holding that fear. What happens is that this mindset with respect to death is mistaken. It can lead to any number of mistaken mindsets, denial, and so forth. So why is it that there's no rational purpose for this kind of fear? When our fear of death is one that's based on attachment to the body, loved ones, and things of this life, we simply end up in this bouncing between what's good and bad, seeking outer things to quell that fear, thinking that outer things, some other conditions, are going to allow us to overcome this fear of being separated from the things of this life, this body, the loved ones, etc., that we have this strong attachment to. But there's no way that's going to happen. It's a form of denial because, of course, the body's natural property is that it's going to die. As a matter of fact, it's been disintegrating from the very first moment of birth. That is the natural property of this body to which we're so attached. And to have a fear of death because we fear the body's natural end and disintegration is pointless. It doesn't help us. It doesn't stop that from happening. It doesn't change the fact that from the very first moment of birth, this body's natural property is one of moving closer to death, disintegrating, and so forth. This form of the body has a natural propensity to end in disintegration and death. And there are no outer circumstances out there, no other conditions that will protect us from that. That's the natural property of the body. There's nothing else to be done. If that weren't the body's natural quality to disintegrate and eventually die, then there would be a method to put a stop to death, but there isn't, because the body has this natural property. And to base our fear of death on something that is impossible to change is pointless. That much is something we have no choice but to accept. When we don't, what happens? When this strong attachment to our body, our loved ones, our wealth and possessions, etc., is the priority of this life, we come under the influence of the kleshas, the various emotions that disturb mind's natural tranquility, and these motivate us to engage in any number of wrongful actions to support and sustain these objects of our attachment. Those wrongful actions are the causes for a negative realm rebirth, and those negative realm rebirths are full of countless sufferings. Seeing that, comprehending that, is a reasonable fear. It's a wholesome fear that is valuable. Understanding that the actions that we take in this life are what lead to our future well-being. That wholesome fear that seeks to avoid negativity now for the benefit of future lives is one that's valuable and necessary.
치와 임바 직바 이내 치위 술 상해 요래. 이 치위 제수 깨달은 바디 레 마봉 바도 가야요 말에. 이내 깨외 술 상해니 요래. 디인자들이 치와디 매버서 맞는 치와디 이니 동을 매봐. 대외강도 치트바단 치위 제수 깨와디양 연송도 막겨와 된돌을 깨트바. 디인디 치위 술 상해니디 랑드르자야 요래. 치위 제수 깨와 상해니 랑드르자야 요래. 제든지 랑드르제 마중암 랑드르 친지로도 제네 시나 딜라 직다게 그래. 딜레 디 단단에 섬로 땅에 직다게나 되니 단단 알아서 주세요 열어. 랑드르제게 고급 요래. 랑드르제게 니바 요래. 디인자들이 디 고급당 니바디 되니 배제 여고도 그래. 랑드르제라 랑드르제게 되니 고급 디 렌투 그래. 직다게 왜 김전디래다. 직다게나 다당가랑도 다주르기 밀리디드네 된침보이 뭐 통그러 딜랑도르 제야기 단다 고급 열어 니바 열어 만들리 된디라 딘디 돈침보이 뭐 통디도서 되니 딘디기 돈침보이 된디양 니마르레 추드레당 깔마르레 라양 이 치와라 펜바 깨와 치마라 펜바 펜베 자와도 부도 이 가르라나 미게와 빵 개와도 부도 농마된도 말아봐 제부도 선배 섬로데 깨고 와라 디게디 치와를 지신다고 지다들 되는 연구구라 어디 있는데 지다디 계시모래
To put it simply, there's no way to do away with death. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. So then our mind turns to what's the way to engage with death in a way that's valuable and appropriate. And not only engaging at the moment of death, but engaging with future rebirths. When we recognize that our future rebirths depend on karmic cause and effect, we understand that it's impossible to do away with death. There's suffering associated with death that we can address by making preparations, and that after death, we will necessarily take rebirth. Then we are driven to do what it takes to have a easeful passing and not take rebirth in the negative realms, but instead take a positive realm rebirth. What this means is that we then seek out the activities that are useful for setting us up for an easeful death, avoiding negative influences and nourishing the positive ones for the time of death and for the lives that we take thereafter. This is simply the judgment calls of what to adopt and reject in this life. We have this mindset that is eager to do what it takes in an appropriate way, rather than to fall into misguided activities of what to do and not to do. This kind of wholesome fear is actually spurring us, inspiring us to engage in reasonable determinations of what to do and not in this life. We have the ability and the need to engage in various activities in this life, and this wholesome fear inspires us to make the efforts in a way that accords with our wishes for an easeful death and a positive rebirth. It's what opens the door to the opportunity to make determinations of what to do and not to do that accord with our wishes. We understand we have this free and resourceful human existence that is greatly meaningful, that has great purpose and great ability. And we put that free and resourceful human existence to work every single day, every minute, every second, every moment for the benefit of our future rebirth by engaging in activities that actually serve our future rebirths here and now. This means avoiding non-virtuous actions, not depending on neutral actions, and actually striving in virtuous activity. The mindset that develops with these aims is one that is born of this wholesome fear, inspiring us to make the decisions on what to do and not, which is why this wholesome fear is so very important.
Hola, tiene cosas tiene, cuando chiva me daba con ni y que dan Nginsongi nimik dene dene o nginsongi nimik komne chiba tembadi dene lende la hiche tumo mai ba kegi kugende o tel tene dene lende la hiche tumo mai ba kegre ti jungna dene lende la langdru chegi tumba ta to tumo mai ba kegre Tela tene dini kedi langdur chela peba dan tolwa shukda bo kegre ti jungna dini ngarang tu misidi nima re shindu lunga yisum ki kedi ni langdur macholwa chigre chetugre imarela chuturela
When we have this mindset that has this understanding from the meditation on the impermanence of our own life, of our mortality, and the wholesome fear that comes of wanting to avoid the deficiencies of a negative realm rebirth, this drives a extraordinary confidence in karmic causality, one that is particularly powerful. The wholesome fear of negative realm rebirth serves as the causes and conditions for developing this powerful confidence in karmic causality. It's what allows us to make determinations of what to do and not in accord with karmic cause and effect. We have this strong longing to decide, these are the actions I will undertake, these are the actions I will reject, based on our confidence in karmic cause and effect. And that in turn fuels very strong efforts and activity to accomplish that. When we have this setup, that means that we make the most of this life. Everything we encounter every day, every hour, with our all three gates of body, speech, and mind, we undertake to avoid non-virtue and engage in virtue, adopting virtuous action and rejecting wrongdoing in an unmistaken way, every day, every hour, every moment, and so forth.
Hola. Di indi diri nga zo chiwa mita bada ngensongi nimik drenbe chikda di. Yue na. Dini tse dila, tse digi dini shimba tada rangshingi shido gure. Dini tse digi punso la shimba tada rangshingi shisong na. Dini di kibe tartu re song. Mulchu tongme sangbogi. 강나야 신차면은 기비 터투기 있어. 디인들이 처음이다 뭐 densul이 양다고 전에 아니 그냥 성기 님이 된데 집다디고 연나. 내가 때네더니 세디 기보 전에 세디기더니 세디기 침부를 해서 그러다.
But wait, there's more. When we have this recollection of our own mortality and the wholesome fear of the deficiencies of negative realm rebirths, then we're actually overturning the reification of the things of this life. Our obsession with the things of this life altogether naturally dissipates. And what happens is we make the most of this life with great enjoyment. We're able to extract the most possible well-being and enjoyment in this life by overturning our obsession with it. This is what comes of recollecting our mortality and having a wholesome fear of a negative realm rebirth with all its deficiencies. Based on that, we become wealthy and well-being, happiness and contentment in this life, here and now.
Hola, 다 직다디 라테네들이 기비 터투 근데스 용그래. 선나 난주 냠뇽제는 갈와라디. 직다 공대 기보 근데스 그래. 이내 양들이 계속 동맥이 아니 세들라 신반매바디 기베 터도 그래서 세들라 신반매바디 치와미다 바당 연송기 님이 되면 주달아 되는 연구라 뒤면은 시트고 말 탑시 신다 요 말. 이 컨디션 연구를 하려면 가서 세들라다 동al 델라드는 류기 동al 당 심기 동al 니여라. 이 낭내들이 또 쳐와도 숙쳐와도 그래 심기 동al로. 진짜 사기변이 돼서래. 사기변이 돼서래더니 가서 사기변이 되더니 और देवे थरतु ही देवा सुन रहे कि भी थरतु ही देवा सुन ही देवा दी कि वो अक्षय दे देने ही देवा दे रहे सुन 이 인비 김성 그래 그런데 리심기 들어니 열어. 리기 대화다 심기 대화니 열어. 동안래 리기 동안다 심기 동안니 열어. 이 니기 능내더니 리기 동안래 심기 동안디 톱치그래 또치그래. 디나신 대화라양 심기 대화다 리기 대화니지는 리기 대화디 이 심기 대화디 톱치그래. 또치그래. 가르치내려면 나도 심기 기보에는 리를 동안 연애양 동을 가서 숙치모 연애양 충충 들어 그래. 쌤디 왕책이라. 쌤디 기보에나. 쌤들의 동을 연애 위기 돈에 가서 기보에네 기보 들고 말해. 쌤 왕책이라. 디인데더니 쌤라 동을 첨부 연애 위기 대화 연애양 대탐지 쌤기 동을 되게 쓰기 내려 그래. 대화인 봉은 누구 말해. 빼러 차잖아. 하나도 쌤라 빼면서 동을 첨부 연. 아니 위기 돈에 아니 항상 5-star 호텔나 데데 여래. 오피스 여래. 이네 디 대화디 지경 처투고 말해. 리라 대기기 롱제디 상화 여래. 리기 디 상화 롱제고 거래디. 이네 리기 대회 들어와디 심기 동을 되기 시기 년도라. 심기 동을 되도 체그래. 다른 아시들은 리라 대화여나. 되니 리기 셈라 대화여나 리라 강을 근에 연해야 되니. 리기 대화디기 심기 강을 양실 되기 년도. 어디 인지 가서 심기 들어와디 또 체그래. 또 체그래 소리. तीन सरेंगी देवे थरसु ये देवा दे रहे हैं
How can it be that this wholesome fear is the basis for a wealth of well-being and contentment in this life? Our experience is the exact opposite of that. Fear doesn't feel good. So how can actually habituating ourselves, cultivating this wholesome fear, actually lead not only to well-being, but to the utmost contentment and well-being? Well, this wholesome fear is the only method for overturning the reification of the things of this life. Our obsession and attachment to this life is overturned only by this wholesome fear that recognizes its impermanence and the consequences of our actions for future existences. So how is it that that becomes the source of well-being, contentment, and happiness? If we think about it, the various discomforts or sufferings, pain, etc., that we experience is one of two kinds, either physical suffering or mental suffering. When we speak of these two, it's the mental suffering which is the strongest. We can also say that conversely, it's when we speak of the consummate happiness, pleasantness, and contentment, what we're speaking of is a contentment of mind. That's what actually allows for this consummate happiness, this complete happiness. Why is that? Because when we consider our experience of happiness, be it physical or mental, the mental feeling of happiness overcomes the physical. And the same applies to suffering. It can be physical or mental. And of the two, be it happiness or suffering, mental happiness is able to overcome and is stronger, is able to overcome suffering and is stronger than physical happiness, just as mental suffering is stronger than physical suffering. How do we know that? Well, think about it. If our body has a great pain and obvious suffering, but our mind is at ease, it's feeling content and at ease, that intense physical suffering is diminished by the strength of the ease of mind. Similarly, if mind has no ease, it has no contentment, then no matter how much comfort we have physically, we don't sense that physical, no matter how much contentment we have physically, we don't sense that physical comfort. due to the lack of ease in the mind. This is because mind is stronger than body when it comes to the experiences of either happiness or suffering. So for example, if our mind is greatly unsettled, uncomfortable, and not at ease, even if we're in the midst of a 5-star hotel with all of the luxuries it has to offer, the body doesn't have anything to complain about. The mind's discomfort overcomes the luxuries of the 5-star hotel, and we don't sense that comfort with much strength because the suffering of mind overcomes it. It's far more powerful even than this great contentment and comfort of the body. Similarly, if the mind is at ease, if it's content and happy, even when we encounter difficulties and suffering in the body, these are diminished, relatively speaking, due to the strength of the mind's sense of ease and comfort. So this is why the ultimate contentment, the ultimate happiness we're able to bring together in this life is one that depends on ease and happiness of mind.
All 다가나시 양 류기 동을 망부시 셈을 때내 연구하라. 변나 류기 내 망부시 셈을 때내 연구하라. 셈기 텐션 등 디프레션 등 딜레데네 류기 나타나고 연구하라. 지제 다가나시더니 류기 동을 망부시 배로 자잖아. 당아도 내가 내내 당체당 미당 님도 주증제네 아니 류라 마소당 라소바 근데 동을 망고시 셈문도 전에 연구하라 셈라테네 연구하라 tinzada semdi tochimboredo semgi dedugdi 류기 dedug래 tochwadan topchwayo.
So we can also see that that there are various illnesses and suffering of the body that could come about with mind as the basis. So depression, stress, and other mental states that are unsettled can yield physical discomfort and even illness. Then any number of other activities, tiredness when it comes to work, difficulties with others, wars, etc. These also arise with mind as the basis. And this way, if we continue to examine, we can see that of the two, body and mind, mind is what feels happiness and suffering more intensely, and that sense of happiness and suffering is more powerful than the corresponding experiences of happiness and suffering of the body.
Olas. Teni indu kaso teni legi dungal semgi dungal mangchawadi kawane yungware lamna sedile shimbala teni yungware yaso. Sedigi ini semgi dungal sangmagi zawadi sedile shimbadire yaso. sedile shimbadi yimbi kimsen karare lamna sedile shimbadigi dile tene kare yungware lamna rewadan dokba chakwadan dawa chakdang redogi namdo nima rerela tongcha puntra mangoro tidawadini chakdang redogi eni namdo ki dawa nangsi di nangla dini ngarang su tsudera nya dawa la tsiba nangsi 어디인데 창당 레도기 다와 디나라 수디디 가수 되네 라마메가 차라 어디인데 창당 레도기 다웬나라 츠버디 애니 동을 탐지기 자와래 손디 다와 딜레 마돌 바두 되네 동을 대외 고급 요 말아 창당 레도기 어레 다와세나 그 변화는 지대 체계여라. 직딩기 체계 춘초시 미드주시여라. 대화 네바 대바 담념바지 디도초 미데와 미데와 마니바 담념바 메바 시도 어디인데 투주 실랑도 타지도 연된데 단에 잡을게기라. 디 김팅기 미투주 실라 당하게 구하라 말해.
Tatare.
디인자 자와스나 그래. 자와데 엔데 도그라 크로스 도그라 말해.
Ale.
크로스 거는 자와 차기 말아. 어디인데 가서 되니 춘초시 미투주시 최 니마를 남서 니마를 밑에 나라다 동타만 보라. 디르레라 남서기 따술디 치줄로도 다기도 춘초시디 타지도 연대 여봐 말에 내가 꽤 망고여래 미투주시디 타지도 꽤 말에 내가 연대 망고여래디 이내 남서 섬수 그래 내가 도바다기도 미투주시디 타지도 꽤 임바는 춘초시디 타지도 연대 임바 다기도 디 무비 인술랑 걸어와라 무비 인술라 걸으라는 춘초시디 타지도 연대 여봐 말에 내가 꽤 망고여래 미드주 실 타지도 껴는데 말이야. 들라야 연대 망고여래. 디니 춘저 실라 껴여래. 미드주 실라 연대 여래디 통금이도 나도. 먼저 그랬다 통고도 그러나 춘저 실이 타지도 연대인데 뭐 미드주 실이 타지도 껴는데 뭐 통고도 와. 디 뭐비 힌틀던 가와라도. 디 뭐비 힌틀던 가왔다 와디 그래. 크로스도 도. 디다 tumba 도금이도. 대라 때네 춘저 시디 톱나선배 라와다 미tun저 시디 용거에서배 도관이 용도 이제 미tun저 시당 미tun저 시당 춘저 시당 달도 그래서배 도관 용거래 톱나선배 라와 용거래 미tun저 시당 달나선배 라와 용거래 미tun저 시 용거에서배 도관 용거래 이제 디레라 저도 니니 지도서 되네 저도 버려도 디안 대 마운트는 대바는 다다의 춘조 미춘조 실을 미베 처당니 이제 몽베 애니 춘조 미춘조 실을 미베 레와도 도바제 어디에 처당다 레도기 저와 투보도 딘데게 되니 남도기 저와 나라 추르 그래 소라라 될 때네 이 동al 섬기 해봐 연구하래 그래서 semgi dungal teletene tension dang depression dang da mangchwa tene yongwara anxiety dang
So understanding that mind is the strongest in feeling and power, be it happiness or suffering, we can then look further and understand that most of the mental discomfort we experience arises from the root of a fixated attachment to the things of this life. It's this reification or obsession with this life that gives rise to mental suffering. Why is that? How is that the case? Well, if you think about it, the obsession with the things of this life, this fixated attachment, yields a constant back and forth between hope and fear, attachment and aversion. How many thoughts of, I hope for this, I fear for that, hoping for what we're attached to, fear for what we're averse to, do we have in a single day? Hundreds of thousands of thoughts bringing turbulence to mind, thinking that I want all these things that I'm attached to and I hope to get them, and I fear getting the ones I'm averse to. The hundreds of thousands of thoughts start to form a web that encases us. That's the nature of this back and forth play of hope and fear, attachment and aversion. It forms this web that encases us, encases the mind in a great turmoil and suffering. So there's no opportunity for actually having a fulfilled plenitude of contentment and happiness in that case. We spoke earlier about the 8 worldly pursuits that have 4 favorable and 4 unfavorable factors paired together so that there's pleasure, gain, fame, and praise as the 4 favorable factors, and pain, loss, shame, and blame as the unfavorable factors. These are examples of the full range of worldly pursuits to which we have this fixated attachment in this life. And that fixated attachment leads us to see the favorable factors as absolutely favorable and nothing more. Favorable in and of themselves. And that leads to strong attachment. Similarly, with respect to the unfavorable factors, we have intense aversion, seeing them as only faulty, absolutely faulty, and nothing else. What does that do? Those fibers of the web start to cross together. Why are they crossing? Because every single day we have hundreds of thousands of thoughts that see pleasure, gain, fame, and praise as absolutely positive and worthwhile, and see pain, loss, shame, and blame, and so forth as absolutely and positively faulty and not worth having. This, however, is mistaken. It's not that these things that seem favorable are absolutely good and nothing else. It's not that things that seem unfavorable are absolutely faulty and nothing else. That goes against the true nature of things. The true nature of things is that even things that appear to be favorable, on the favorable side of these 8 worldly pursuits, have many flaws that go with them. And even the things that seem unfavorable have many qualities that go with them. But when we don't see that due to our fixated attachment to the things of this life, we see only the qualities of the favorable sides of the 8 worldly pursuits and only the flaws of the unfavorable sides. So instead of going with the flow of the nature of things as they are, we're going against it. These thoughts are crossing and creating that web. So to have a web, you need to have things going perpendicular to each other to create this kind of netting. And what happens is that the fear of having these unfavorable situations and the hope of getting only the favorable ones are at cross purposes with the nature of things. That's what weaves this web. And then on top of that, we have the fear that rather than being free of the unfavorable factors, we'll actually encounter them. Rather than getting the favorable factors, will be unable to attain them. And not only do we have that now, but then the same exact factor starts to spin our mind with respect to the future. Will I be able to get these favorable things? Will I not be able to get them? I really hope to get them. I fear getting the unfavorable ones. I fear that they'll come, and so forth. And the net gets tighter and tighter. Based on this, all manner of mental suffering arises. It's absolutely incomprehensible how much mental suffering comes about from this crossplay of hope and fear, attachment and aversion. Based on this, we see tension, anxiety, depression, and so forth, all of the various kinds of mental suffering arising.
All of that did with it. That did any redogi tawa chadangi tawadi chui gel migwe redogi tawada chadangi tawadi tadunga gebasena Tini ngaransu tadang nyen, tadang shen nisu tagiro, shen layang tadang nyen nisu chigiro, ewa chigiro ngansu. Chidila shimbaya na. Tini tanyen nisu ewa chidigosu, tanyen nisu ewa chidigosu, tini ngansu jikden chue ge di, eni tuncho shi di, ngansu nyen la mingne, eni tuncho shi, jungna kawa. Rangi nyen la mi tuncho shi, jungna mi kawa. Tina shi tini tala migna, tini jikden ki tuncho shi di, tala jungna magawa. Mi tuncho shi, jungna kawa. Tini gaduk nini kegidowa. 다가나서 어디로 다 뒤로 저기 되니 타야봐 연구하래 다 레와던 동과던 청단기 동과 타야봐 연구하래 최기에디 랑라미과 녜라미과 에네 달라미과 거니 따나 되네 레도기 섬로당 에니 청단기 섬로 니머레레라용 당메바 연구하래 데이터베 되니 레도당 청단기 동비에 더하나라 가서 추도거라 디인자들이 심 대보다 회보 시와등 대화용에게 그거 배워말해 심 마시와등 마대we 낭라 되니 드세 도거래
This net of hope and fear, attachment and aversion doesn't stop there. It's not just with respect to ourselves that we are hoping for what we're attached to, fearing what we're averse to. Now, in addition to that, we have the same kind of situation when it comes to others. So generally speaking, if we think of other beings, we have this mindset that dualistically divides them up into me and them. Self and other are the two major classifications that mind divides beings into. And this is what happens with this reification of the things of this life. Taking things to be real depends on taking self and other as real distinctions. So then these distinctions of self and other operate in the context of the 8 worldly concerns. We just saw how that operates with respect to ourselves, but it goes farther. When it comes to our friends, our families, our dear ones, similarly, with them as the focal point, we're happy when they encounter any of the favorable factors of the 8 mundane concerns, and we're unhappy if they encounter any of the seemingly unfavorable factors. When it comes to individuals that we classify even further, not just other than me, but friends or enemies, enemies encountering favorable conditions, we don't like it. Enemies encountering unfavorable conditions, we enjoy. So the conditions for hope and fear, attachment and aversion increase. We hope our dear ones encounter favorable conditions and not unfavorable ones, and we fear that that won't happen. We hope that our enemies will encounter unfavorable conditions and not favorable ones, and we fear that doesn't happen. It's endless. This hope and fear, attachment and aversion, the turmoil that it causes in our mind with respect to ourselves, others, friends, family, loved ones, enemies, and so forth, brings our mind into turmoil, roiling the mind. Every day, countless times per day, this mindset that flings the mind from attachment to aversion and back is constantly roiling the mind. This is what happens in the course of this life. The mind doesn't have the opportunity to come to ease, to be at contentment, to relax. Our time is spent in our mind being in turmoil. Our mind is not at ease, not at a sense of contentment, and the time in this life is spent in this way.
Hola, the dito with any redogi, Changdang redogi, Tobi, Tawana, Sidodi, then sim giba, Lui Midewa, Karasana, Changdang redodi, Kulne, Lui di Yobo Chagra. The sim Mashiva, Lila Shiva, Talbo deagi, Ragmara, Lui and busy shadow. Chagdang redodi Yobo Chagra. Then Lui Yang, two Midewa, Lui Trebo, Genedeagi, Goga Ragmare, Della Sapa, Genedegores. Then Nayang, Delbo Degmare. Didn't Lunga is some Garjigre, Miguel Shada do grace. The Gajorni Pegimare, Miguel Plegres. Didn't Missidi, Sim Migi, Lumide, Senator Guda, but then is a Missy Kulna Garsa, Shidi goes a young Kiboyong Mares. Shidi goes a Dungal Chimboyong. Karsana Dambo, Dungal Sedila Deni, nearly Longjola Chavo Shukchimbo Yoro Digos. Didn't tell with Dungal Shukchimbo Yongre. The Dabo Gomio Mara. The Changdangi Tobadi Digasun Dungal Jagro. Nearly Longjo the mediation to Delgo Dungal Chimbo Yore. This Chandango. Then Shidi was a Pembe Gava Dubio Mare, Miguel Dubiore. Then Dilla Gavashimbo. Then Miguel Wangi Yang Shiva was a name, not a Shukchimaya Young Sigra. Dindi, any name now I do not. In the Shidi goes to the name. Dungal Sangi Gavaji. She was just a young Bardola Tulang Chambo. Then he Gavajima Gavayang, Yansong the Gavalimba, Gavalin Dungal. Dindi said the Shikadam Bardo Gavachima Tamjala. This said la Chagwe Nimber, Chagwe Nimigre.
This web of thoughts, this net of hope and fear, attachment and aversion that grips the mind, prevents mind from having ease in this life. And then out of that unease of mind, we find that mind brings the body into a state of discomfort as well. When mind is not at ease and bounced around with hope and fear, attachment and aversion, it enslaves the mind, it enslaves the body, making it the servant of mind's constant search for its accomplishing its hopes and avoiding its fears. This unpeaceful, uneased mind that spurs the body into action, insisting that it do everything it takes to avoid the things that are feared and attain the things that are hoped for, makes the body very busy. It has an endless amount of activities, becomes extremely busy accomplishing all of the orders of this mind in turmoil. Not only that, even our very speech does not have ease and contentment. Body, speech, and mind are all enslaved by this attachment and aversion that seeks to gain what seems favorable and avoid what seems unfavorable. This inevitably leads to an endless array of various non-virtuous actions, and the opportunity to accomplish virtue does not get nourished at all. That opportunity does not get cultivated, it does not increase, and instead what increases is an array of non-virtuous activities. What happens at the end of a human life? spent in this way, with the mind in turmoil, enslaving the body and the speech in constant activity. At the time of death, there is no ease. It's extremely uncomfortable and painful. The fixated attachment that was cultivated and increased throughout this life to this body, to our dear ones, to our wealth and possessions, becomes the source of unbearable suffering, knowing that we must be separated from them. This occurs when we don't have the understanding that comes of meditating on our own mortality. The suffering of being parted from our bodies, our dear ones, our wealth and possessions, and so, etc., is incredibly powerful. It's driven by attachment that is cultivated and nourished throughout the source of this life that prevented us from accomplishing what would benefit us at the time of death, and instead led to a series of non-virtuous actions, a series of mental unease and illness, and the suffering that comes of that. So at the time of death, we experience this mind in turmoil and all the suffering that comes. And that same suffering, that same turmoil continues into the bardo, the intermediate state after death, and into the rebirth in the next life, even leading to negative realm rebirths. The sufferings of the mind at the time of death in the bardo and upon taking rebirth are an obstacle created by attachment. This is the incredible disadvantage of the attachment to the things of this life.
Hola. Ta dito dini che dila tungal chiwe kapsu tungal chiwe jesu bardo dan kewa chimala tungal ba shiba. Chunga di chunga jikingi ta. So di karre rana marang si sim che dila shimba che dila shimbe sim dile. Damjegi chungkungdi. Chedele shimbadi kawani kere islana. Chwa mitakbala mongbe marikbadang. Lendela mongbe marikbala teni chware. Di indi dini lende shebe sharabdang. Chwa mitakba shebe sharabni. Gyula kena. Dini la mongbe mongba dodo di. Dini la teni chedele shimbe shimba dodo gore. Chedi punzo kangla yang shinchame ba. Chedi punzo kangla yang shinchame ba. Eni shimba dodo di. Dini dila teni jungye dini redo tang chadangi dini samli dawa. Diyang shikdo gore. Di dila teni jungye dungal thangwa shido gore. Di kibi tardu gore sunga. Di jungna misi di kibo do gore. Sim kibo, lu debo. Eni kejor pelwa, dibdib dawa. Dini di jungna misi di jungna chiwe kaso gore yung gore da. Chiwe kaso yang dini kejor dida madalwa, sim shiwa, nemeba. Shigre, eni dile bardo diyang dirawa yung gura. Bardo la tunang meba. Dini kewa chima yang dini ngin songi nele to. Dendro turigi lada mii lusu kewa yung gore. Dini zan 진짜 매버디 기베 털투래 소리
the suffering of this life, the suffering at the time of death and after death in the intermediate state of the bardo and in future lives. All of this arises entirely from the basis of the fixated attachment to the things of this life, taking them to be real, valuable in and of themselves, is the main basis from which all of these various sufferings arise. Where does this reification of the things of this life come from? It comes from the ignorance that is blind to the impermanence in the form of our mortality and that does not understand karmic causality. These two kinds of ignorance are the source of the reification of the things of this life, taking them to be ends in and of themselves, real and valuable in and of themselves. The precise knowledge or prajna with respect to our own mortality and respect to karmic causality, when it is active in our mind stream, is able to neutralize these two kinds of ignorance. It is able to overcome them. And in that way, we are not attached to the abundant goodness of this life. We're able to engage in the goodness of this life without the attachment, having overturned the reification of the things of this life as real, as ends in and of themselves. What happens from that mindset? This is a mindset where this net, this webbing that encases the mind in constant turmoil of hope and fear, attachment and aversion starts to dissolve. And with the dissolution of that web, the suffering that comes of that also diminishes. Our life is increasingly content and happy. Our mind is at ease. Our body is at ease. The web continues to dissolve with all our activities. We have a content, happy life of well-being now. And at the time of death, the mind continues at ease without attachment to the things that it must part from. And beyond that, in the bardo, the various appearances of the bardo do not bring more turmoil to mind, do not delude the mind. And when it comes time to take a rebirth, this mind at ease is able to take rebirth among the favorable states of devas and humans. This is why overturning this fixated attachment to this life that reifies things as real yields the ultimate happiness here and now, at death, in the bardo, and in the next life.
All the Indian lady shebe shirab dang midaba shebe shirab ni latene any Ninsongi name la Jishu Tabe Chitadang or Chua Midaba dang Ninsongi name la Tabe Chita, Kateki Shuktabu Yena. Tezongi didn't say dilation be Shincha Shiva Subchigre. Jidamgi Federation be Shimbashina, Tezongi Sedigi Jidingi Chi Gale and Migbe, then it Chaldan the Redo, Ki Samli Tawa, Shigdogre. Tezongi dini, Dela Deni Jung Dungal Tama Shidogre, Tidam, Jidam Chigdachawa Yana. Tezam any Shidi Chaware. Simki Shidi Chaware. Things that any Kadambe Kivishin in Chigisumare. Keep a Dungala Sol soon. Tiki Gona Dungala Solvaresum. Things that any Chawamida with Chigdadang, Yansongi Chigdadi, any Dungal Gas in the Mare. Sim Shiva and Kibos Residere.
based on the precise knowledge that understands karmic causality and the precise knowledge that recalls our mortality consistently, we can cultivate a wholesome fear of the deficiencies of a negative rebirth, a wholesome fear with respect to our own mortality. And this is what quells the fixated attachment to this life that reifies things, that takes them to be valuable in and of themselves. When this reification of the things of this life is pacified, then the 8 worldly pursuits no longer become a focus of hope and fear, attachment and aversion. The mind looks on them with clarity, with ease. This is the greatest possible well-being and ease of mind. It is because of this that the great Kadampa Yeshe say that if we seek well-being and contentment, we should do so by making use of suffering. It is the kind of discomfort that comes from the wholesome fear of the negative one rebirths, the wholesome fear of our mortality that overturns our reification of the things of this life and that brings the mind to a state of ease, contentment, and well-being.
Hola. Tiene que ser de chiva mitad para niños ni dentul yang da bachene tena tene chida sultan tumbaji kena dela tene de ngaze simki redo dan changdangi tawa le dolne semdi ni guyangbo namkhanashi thodu meba guyangbo chaigre esore semdi guyangbo chana de ni garchagre dangbo chagre esore semdi dangbo chana garchagre semdi jambo chagre esore tubu meba 시당 연구 말아 차과 요 말아 차과면도 시당 연구 말아 디엔디들이 전부 차기래요 성대가 양보 당보 전보 되게 그렇지 그래라나 뒷배 고가 그래 개와 두에 그 고치 그래 이제 개와 두배 고에 시그래 개와 두배라 꿀마야 지 그래 그래서 직자 열어 이제 질레니요 개와 두배 고급치 그래 개와 두배 꿀마야 지 그래 근데 개와 두배 고급치 개와 두배 꿀마 개와 마두가 미스버라
With the precise knowledge that leads to wholesome fear of our own mortality, the impermanence of this life, and the wholesome fear of negative realm rebirth, fully developed in a entirely qualified, authentic way with all of its qualities. What happens? The mind is no longer constantly stoked by hope and fear, attachment and aversion. The constant whirlpool and turmoil of hope and fear dies out, and the mind starts to expand. The tightness is gone, and the mind's perspective becomes panoramic. It's at ease, clear, and gentle. There is no tension from the constant fight of hope and fear, attachment and aversion. Without attachment, then there's no basis for aggression to arise. This mind that is panoramic in perspective, limpidly clear and gentle, flexible, is one that has the great opportunity to accomplish virtue and closes the door to undertaking non-virtue. In addition, these two wholesome fears of our mortality and the possibility of a negative realm rebirth also serve as inspiration to accomplish virtue. So there are these two functions that it serves. These wholesome fears provide the opportunity to attain contentment and happiness, and the inspiration, the spur to attaining happiness. When you have the opportunity to attain happiness and you're inspired to do so, it's impossible that that happiness will not come.
Hola.当然저 치와미도 봐. 치와미도 봐. 인성기 님이제 아니 레군데 디숨디 당보 검지거서 레레레레 신도 검고그라. 근데 레레 신도 검니 뇽하게 사나? 근데 치와미도 봐 검지거서 디 슈글람 쇼르라. 근데 인성기 님이당 레군데 양태용 그라. 3 in 1 차가. built up. Then lende dendu kasu chewamita badang yasong yemi yantingiro.
Yeshe, you're muted.
When we're first undertaking the meditations on the impermanence of our own mortality, the deficiencies of the negative realm rebirths, and the operation of karmic causality, we undertake these meditations in sequence, one after another. And from those meditations, we're able to develop the experiential understanding of each of these sequentially as well. Then what happens is that experiential understanding of the impermanence of our own mortality is able to also implicitly bring up the understanding of the deficiencies of a negative realm rebirth and the operation of karmic causality. Once we've gone through these sequentially, it's like there are three in one. They build up all together. They're an integrated whole. Similarly, for example, the experiential understanding of karmic causality will also implicitly bring up the experiential understanding of our own mortality and the deficiencies of a negative realm rebirth.
디지디드는 냠랭기 닝보디 라로 요래. 디엔자드는 디 직다데 코메데드는 직다게 지부치도 말에 디기 슈글라. 먼저 체디기 신자 도바당 라소바당 데시바네시 펜 타야바 요래. 어디 된다더니 가든베기 외신이 송하나시 기버 둘라 설로 송래 되기 거는 동안래 설거래 송래 되기 동안래라 그래 송래 되니 그냥 동안래 되나 되기 돌아요 말했어 디디드니 추어미다 봐라 Kombe chigda dang nyensung nimi kombe chigda la tana. Fear is fear to fear. Fear is object to fear, right? The chigda la tak wadi chigda ki yulre. Nyensung nimi kombe chigda dang midawa kombe chigda la tana. Chigda la tak wadi chigda ki yulre. There didn't say deal dungal mango young redney. Said he shinja plegiro. Del dene didn't say di chigadang chima or the thama ladani dungal mutameva young.
Often the fear, the discomfort of contemplating our own mortality and negative realm rebirths is so powerful that we avoid these practices altogether. The fear leads us to turn away from the meditations on our mortality and the deficiencies of a negative realm rebirth. And by avoiding the fear, we miss the essential point of our Dharma practice. Giving rise to the fear itself is not the point of these meditations. It's the impact that that fear implicitly has, that it drives any number of benefits from reversing our reification of the things of this life and so forth. That's the purpose of that wholesome fear, which is why the Kadampa Geshes advise us to encounter goodness, happiness, by means of using what is unpleasant in this way. This wholesome fear is what allows us to gain well-being, contentment, and ease. By striving to be done with the discomfort that comes of that wholesome fear, we also end up not having the ability to gain that well-being. But when we think about it in this way, we realize that the fear that is a product of the meditations on our own impermanence and negative realm rebirths is not itself something to fear. We take that fear as the object of our fear. And actually, the only thing we have to fear is that fear itself. Because when we actually look into that wholesome fear, we're able to overcome the attachment to this life. And without doing so, the sufferings of this life, our fixated attachment, our reification of it actually increase, and all of the sufferings of this life, the time of death, in the intermediate state of the bardo, and in future lives increase.
All Taganashidini, Kadambi Shingi, Karasuna, Tarangla Solution. Tachirul to say, Darangla Solution. The Tati Surelana, said the Shimbadra, Lendala Mumbai Maribadra. Then said the Shimbad and Lendela Mumbai Maribadi. Tatasure already. The time by Shena, then it's Rolla, Tada Ni Tungmare, Nin Bashigre. Taganashi Chidi Chigi, Sambo and Yambaniera, Sambo and Yambayang Tungmare, Sangin Yamgre. Dindi, Tanin Yam, Sangin Yam. Then Chagdan Yam, Redo Yam. Then keep you go to Greta. The or did.
This is why the Kadampa Geshes continue and say to find the enemies, look within yourself. What they're saying is there are no enemies out there somewhere to be found. Who is the enemy, the great foe that we are looking for? It's our own reification of the things of this life, the fixated attachment that takes them to be real in and of themselves, together with the ignorance that does not understand the operation of karmic causality. These are our ultimate foes. When we understand that these are our ultimate foes, what happens? When we look out in the world, we don't separate out friends and enemies. The dualistic thinking that compartmentalizes individuals into friend and enemy dissipates. The dualistic thinking that looks for good and bad dissipates. The thinking of hope and fear dissipates. Attachment and aversion dissipates. Now, well-being can begin.
Hola. Tiene de ni. Nando. Pamutuba. Togin Pamutuba Gisore. Any Dogin Pamutuba Gisore. Ningni Chishi Gogurna, Dungal Tamje Devarshar Sonre. Chigi Dunda Yang Daba Ning Tawane Hagona Sonre. Dundadi Mazu Sedila Shimbado, Lo Chus Dona Sonre. Sedila Shimba, Midawadang Yansungi Nimi, Lendi Gunde Shena, Sedila Shimba Ting do Digosu, Chekuna, Pemba Imbadi Tongudoa. The Sedila Shimba Madonna, Chegi Pian Tongman. Things that didn't know Namgyal Che Lamna and Munegi sent Dingy Che some Marago. Chigdin Chigi Gimtingi Che Tonamado. Things that didn't Taburumichi Debadang Deba Nursayo Sonra. Pedro Chasana and Chela Debagadi, Chedel Debagadi, Chedel Debagadi, Sedila Shinchagi Wangi. Debagina. Pernada, Chedi, Yawin Basamedi, Mother Chedi, never could deal a chap, never could do to beg a tab the chain, but Hondi goes to Debagira, Kawagira. In another day, Deba in some Gora, Munijana did Deba Remedy, Debaradi. Debakisagi, Kawakisagi, you'll did in it, Che in a young, Della Kawaki, Suldi, Karelana, Kawaki wedding, Marangla, Nepa and Kurtico were did to beg a tabdi. Chela Yungi Dilla Gawaki Waramare. These are Gawaki, never could deal a Chaba Gumsin in a Kera. Dini gawake yul manro ine gawake bi tsul di norara. Dini dila mune deba mare di deba reso. Tawo yora karsana number chibara. Number gawe number chandi chibara. Mikpa chibara. Dini kaso deba norsa yeso re. Chikil tabula chigi. Dini chungune chaya marada. Ine ngaso chuyi insune chule nyanga yora. Chulgi yora. Dini indu kaso di chuyi 닝네 추이 임베든다디 고야마라 닝네 추이 임베든다디 고야라 그래 고는 세들의 심바도 그래서 어디인데니 렌데시 민송이 니믹시 이 딜라 직다게 가서 신의 추억이 된다디 신이 하고 그래서 만들어야 돼. 그래서 대방원에 얘기기라. 닝니 최시 고기로나. 네가서 그래 용을 하면 동안 탐제 대화를 시작했어.
This is lasa. The protector of beings, Pagmodrupma also has something to say about this. He says that it is by seeing what is defective that we are able to accomplish happiness instead of having that be the source of all our suffering. So while the defects of the negative rebirths, etc., are the source of suffering, that understanding is what allows us to accomplish happiness instead. This is the authentic meaning of the Dharma. It's why turning the mind to Dharma requires overcoming the reification of the things of this life, having a fixated attachment to them as real in and of themselves. Why is that? How is it that the deficiencies are actually the way to accomplish happiness? The deficiencies of the negative realm rebirths, the understanding of our mortality and karmic causality, these are the understandings that allow us to actually understand the value of Dharma. This is how we see why Dharma is important. Without them, we don't actually see the true benefit of Dharma, the authentic value of Dharma. When we do not reverse our reification of the things of this life, rather than seeing the genuine benefits of Dharma, there is a genuine fear that the Dharma can become just another method for accomplishing the 8 worldly pursuits. This is why the Dharma Lord Gampopa says that there is a strong ability to confuse faith and wishing. These 2 words also sound alike in Tibetan, so that there's a word play there. It's possible to confuse faith and just a wish or liking for Dharma. For example, we can engage in the genuine Dharma from a sense of attachment to the things of this life, seeking the reputation, respect, offerings, etc., that come about from having a practice of Dharma, and liking the Dharma, having an enjoyment of Dharma, because it is a means for gaining status, reputation, and so forth. From the outside, it can look like faith. This individual might even think of it as faith, but it's a mere semblance of faith. It actually arose from an attachment to the things of this life, reifying the respect, reputation, status, etc., as the ultimate aims. So the object of the enjoyment is the same, it's Dharma, but the reasons, the way that enjoyment arises is quite different. Instead of Dharma arising as the natural consequence of reversing our reification of this life, here it's Dharma serving the purposes of this life. We are so eager for reputation, status, pleasure, fame, etc., that comes of our practice of Dharma, and we recognize that Dharma is a way of doing that, and we say, yes, I'm going to practice the Dharma so I can get me all of that stuff. That is actually an attachment that's arising. It's a fixation that's arising. The object of that fixation is the Dharma. It's an unmistaken object. But the way we're engaging the object in this example is mistaken. This is what Gampopa means by saying that there's a possibility for mistaking faith and wishing or wanting. The object is the same, the Dharma. The two situations are the same in that there's an enjoyment of the Dharma, a longing or wish to accomplish the Dharma. But the reasons, the way those come up are quite different. One is driven by attachment to the things of this life, reifying them, and the other is driven by the reversal of that attachment. This is why the monk physician, the Lord Gampopa, says that it's possible to mistake a unwholesome longing for faith. These two can be very similar. To practice the Dharma from the depths of our hearts in a genuine way, we need to understand its value. That understanding comes from reversing our reification of the things of this life, taking them to be valuable in and of themselves. That comes about from the understanding of the defects of the negative realm rebirths and the operation of karmic causality and our own mortality. This is an enjoyment of Dharma that is cognizant of its benefits, of its advantages, and engages it in an unmistaken way. And by doing so, accomplishes this advice of Pagmo-drupa to gain happiness by these unmistaken means.
Tena maga mena ga sayadina. Nina maga, tena maga dugna ga sayada. Namgyunga to dugna maga kina ga chagra. Ningni chishi gona gara yung godona yung gres. Kina maga dugna ga, tena maga mena ga. Tindi namgyunga to dungal sayadi dewa thungres. Kas mepala yende mamu thungore. Tinashin dungal la yende mangu thongor ningne sheko na din da mituncho shila yang yende mangu yoba thongore yes na din din mituncho shila yang kawaki gres di mituncho shila dang tujo shila di chadang nyom do gres songra din thongor.
So what Pagmo-drupa is saying here is that by having the reference point correctly fixed in our sight, engaging with the focus properly, all suffering becomes happiness. This is, as I just explained, when we understand the genuine meaning of the Dharma, that it is arising out of the reversal of our reification of this life, then all of what could be suffering, in this case, this refers to the unfavorable factors among the 8 worldly pursuits, which are considered solely as suffering, now become the source of happiness. By understanding the focus, the 8 worldly pursuits with accuracy, by understanding the Dharma with accuracy. We can do as is said, not be so happy with ease, but actually appreciate the difficult, not be so happy with what is favorable, but appreciate what is not. In this way, we can see the value of how unfavorable conditions can have excellent qualities, and similarly, even suffering can have excellent qualities. And that way, we can use even unfavorable conditions, even suffering, as a means for attaining happiness. This is a reversal of our attachment to the things of this life that leads to attachment to the favorable side of the 8 worldly pursuits and aversion to the unfavorable sides.
Hola. 이게 되네. 미다버시베 시럽당 렌데시베 시럽을 때네. 양답이 되와. 미다버시베 시럽당 아니 렌데시베 시럽을 때네. 당 연송기 둥을 라 직신답에 로 슉답고 끼게래디. 이내양 직자 될 때네. 세디기 신자시 담배셔라 아니 로 담배셔서도 될 때네 되네. 나도 그래서 그러 세디기 레도단 차단기 다왈레 돌वे 대화 담바 양나 담배 취기 대화 양다부터 그래 이제 담배 취기 대화당 남긴 것도 되게 인터넷 때문에 대화지 열어 이니 개발 좀 보여 이제 되게 인터넷 때문에 대화지 그러잖아 아니 대화 롱체는 저도 그래 담배 취기 대화지 롱체는 별그래 되게 인딩이 대화라 그래요라나 근데 다 있네 봐요래 갈긴라 때는 있네 봐 용시 그래 이제 담배 취기 대화라 시 갈긴요 말해 갈긴기 갈긴다 다 있네 봐기 좀 해요 말해서 되게 인딩이 대화디 시디 가서 달도 그래 이제 담배 취기 대화디 시디 가서 그냥 달아요 말해 개와치만 그래요 다가 나시더니 되게 인딩이 대화디 대화 충주지 열에 네 슉라 동을 망보지 튀기래 이제 담배 취기 대화디 아니 담배 취기 대화를 때네 동을 영화예요 말 담배 취기 대화디게 되니 동을 기규 녀몽바당 될 때네 중에 이거 미겨와 양 좀 그래 담배 취기 대화디게 녀몽베 녀보지 그래 아니 녀몽벌 때네 중에 예배 줘봐 디박이 녀보지 그래 티인들이 세딜라 담배 취기 대화를 때네 동을 가야 용 말해 개와 저마양 담배 취를 때문에 동을 가야 용 말해 어디인지 세디시 니가라 동을 가야 깨기 말해 디마세베 동을 기규 녀몽바당 녀몽벌 때네 중에 예배 줘봐기 녀보지 그래 이는 대비 인딩이 대화디 고도는 용으로 대화 중중되게 슉라 동을 먹고 튀그래. 대전도 마서 될때는 동을 기구 녀몽 풀기래. 녀몽을 때문에 예배처럼 뒤바 풀기래. 인자들이 개와청을 편절해요. 동을 그다음에 봐요. 뒤인데 대비 인딩 대화당 담배치기 대화니 겨버디로요. 뒤인데 담배치기 대화디 담배 대화당 된담배 대화래. 대화 ten이 말해. 대비 인딩이 대화디 대화 ten이 말해. 대비 명다고 그래서. 영문에 말해.
With the precise knowledge, the prajna that understands our own mortality, and the precise knowledge that understands the operation of karmic causality, we're able to attain genuine happiness. How is that? The understanding of the sufferings of negative realm rebirth yields this wholesome fear in a very powerful way. Based on this very strong yet wholesome fear, we're able to pacify the intense reification of the things of this life. We no longer take them as ends in themselves. That means that the mind has turned to Dharma. This is the clarity of mind accomplishing the genuine Dharma. It is a contentment because it is free of the hope and fear, attachment and aversion that reifying the things of this life throws the mind into. It's a genuine contentment because it actually yields contentment. Generally speaking, when we speak of genuine contentment here, in other words, we could say this is the contentment of genuine Dharma. Usually, we think of happiness as the happiness that comes from sensory pleasures. All of the various sensory pleasures are what we think of as happiness, but there's quite a big difference between the happiness of sensory pleasures and the genuine happiness of the Dharma. Why is that? Well, when you think about it, when the more we engage sensory pleasures, the less there are of them. Then, by contrast, the more we engage in the happiness of the genuine Dharma, the more it increases. In addition, the happiness of sensory pleasures is vulnerable to any number of unfavorable conditions. There's any number of opposing forces that can remove the ability to gain this happiness of sensory pleasures. And because these are external forces, there's nothing much we can do about it. Meanwhile, the happiness that comes of genuine Dharma doesn't have any unfavorable conditions. Unfavorable conditions actually fuel the happiness of genuine Dharma. There is no external condition that can vanquish this happiness that comes of genuine Dharma. And it continues throughout this life and at death and into the next rebirth, which is not the case with the happiness of sensory pleasures. However much we experience them in this life, it actually increases our suffering at the time of death and beyond. What's more, the happiness we are able to eke out of our sense pleasures is relatively small. It's pretty minor, and indirectly, it fuels any number of different sufferings. Meanwhile, the happiness that comes of genuine Dharma does not serve as a basis for suffering. It simply serves as a basis for more happiness. How is that? When we think of what is the cause of suffering, the cause of suffering are the kleshas, the mindsets that, the emotions that disturb mind's natural tranquility and that drive us to engage in any number of actions under their power. This means that we are driven to engage even in wrongdoing and non-virtue, etc. Meanwhile, the happiness that comes of genuine Dharma is not a cause for the kleshas. It's the cause to remedy the kleshas. It's a cause for remedying even the wrongdoing and non-virtue we have performed, as opposed to sensory pleasures that fuel the kleshas, fuel the wrongdoing and non-virtue. So that means that at the time of death, the happiness of Dharma is present. At the time of our life, it's present. In future lives, it's present, and suffering is not. Whereas the happiness of sensory pleasures is minor, fuels the kleshas, and does not serve as a remedy. So this is the situation. This is the great difference. The happiness that comes of sensory pleasures is relatively minor. It fuels much greater suffering than the happiness it brings. And based on that minor amount of happiness, we generate the kleshas that lead to wrongdoing, non-virtue, and suffering in future rebirths. This is quite different than the happiness of genuine Dharma. And you could really say that what we call the happiness of sensory pleasures is happiness in name alone. It's simply labeled happiness. It's not happiness genuinely at all, whereas the happiness that comes from genuine Dharma is genuine. It's actual happiness.
Oh, that big so low choose to do it till the Kasang share. In a low choose to do it any top the Ninsong Dang Chiwamita will attack with Chita combat so into the soup. Tell a logdog yadwa. Then a logdog is saying it in a kixel drink shiver. Logdog gig the say kixel. The drink shiver. The Shango Gashimur. The men of the name. That Chita Kiki do some young Della. Lochus do a go guard over.
So as I explained earlier, the way to turn the mind to Dharma, the methods that do so, there are these meditations that give rise to a wholesome fear with respect to our own mortality and the negative realm rebirths that are a possibility to follow. But when we hear that, we can have some mistaken ideas about that. And what I explained today is the ways to get rid of these hindrances of the mistaken views with respect to these crucial methods for turning the mind to Dharma. It's really important to understand how to dispel the wrong views that may arise that are hindrances, because without them, those hindrances can close the door to turning the mind to Dharma.
Oh, then drink this agree. Dig it up, low choose to draw the shit harvard. That drink this agree. Then a Kasangi do not get none, then she the link of nobody than the link again.
Lassa.
Then don't go killing nobody Lona.
Lassa. So today I finished the explanation of the mind turning to Dharma, and we'll leave the formal body of the teachings there for today. Previously, I received 5 questions, of which I responded to 4, and I'd like to take the opportunity now to answer the 5th. That question reads, I recently received a cancer diagnosis. How much should I be concerned with fighting the illness instead of simply accepting it?
Hola, tadi any ne le tagbe tag yore. The in the thing also that Chitang ne the Kawangame le Latini Jore, the any Kawangame le the Gure, then Guchibul then ne Yumare, de la Kenyang yore. O the in the Gasutini, O de la Tagbache, Tapsi Yang yore. The in the Tapsi that means I am last over. 탑시 그래 요새디 배도 제국어 이나양 배로 자신하더니 탑시 맨 대야다 직제 양소소 교환감이 레디브 중앙에 탑시 제야다 직제구나 다 도지 이게 개박이더니 냠년 제야당 라서봐 드니 양나 동ling 고매당 어때지나 드니 교환감이 레디브 장내 양내 다고 쓰기래 드니 디냠도 매양대 어때들이 최당 맨니기 돈에 드니 내딜에 시에기 탑시 요새디 배설 제국이야
So when we encounter any kind of illness in this life, it's something that occurs based on the karma of previous lives. The cause for experiencing illness in this life, however strong it might be, is the karma of previous lives. But it's not just the cause of previous karma that's operating. There are also different conditions that arise at the same time. For example, there are various techniques, methods that can be used, treatments such as taking medicine or any number of other medical treatments. And it's important to undertake those. It's important to take advantage of the treatments that are available for those illnesses. But in addition to that, for example, we don't need to leave it, the medical treatments. There are, in addition to the techniques that medicine has to offer, the practices that allow us to address the obscurations caused by karma of previous lives. So the medical treatment can address the active illness. And in addition, we can engage in, for example, the recitation of the 100-syllable mantra of Vajrasattva, or the Tonglen, taking and sending meditations, etc., as a way to diminish the cause of the illness, the obscurations of karma from previous lives. So when you couple that reliance on the medical treatment and the Dharma treatment, these two methods together are able to address the pacification of the illness to best effect, and it's essential to make the efforts to do so.
내 시에게 탑시 요새디 배들 제고 그래. 근데 내 시에게 탑시 때나 양들이 내 심화습는 들어야 교바양 고고 말해. 이제 교바지나 교바 제는 된다 메라. 이제 그래서 내디 내 시에 탑 들었더니 계속 같으면 내 시기를 쓰는 가랜티요 말아. 이 개왕감에 내숙 최종을 알아 그러 말해.
Nare.
여봐야 시기래 매봐야 시기래 이가서 탑시리 가서 맞아봐도 하고 말아야 진디드니 탑 여봐야는 가서 탑시리지 되는 다 그래 탑 매봐야는 가서 탑시리기 마편 버전에 된다 네 시에 탑시 믿으나 이게 바뀌고 말해 액셉트 적으래 액셉트 제버도는 맛에 되니 네기 둥알디 양 연대 망고 열어 그래라나 네기 둥알 될라더니 렌델레 이치베 고갑여래 이 고갑 렌델레 이치게 될라더니 코발랭이 중계하기 고갑여래 심지어 신다 랑낭시기 둥알 영리 심지어 빠도 메가여래 뒤설에 닝지에 계획이 고갑여래 디나시 계속 시월에 손에 신 둥알로 연대 망고 열었어 렌델 이시게 디발라셈 개발라가 나겔시 라소바더니 연대 망고 열에 디르베더니 연진돼서 셴버제네 되니 동알디 냠닝이 도프 켜고 그래.
So if there are methods that will actually help to cure the illness, then of course it's important to make all the efforts necessary to do so. If there are no methods to cure it, if the various techniques available, the treatments are not able to actually address and cure the illness, then there really isn't much point to undergoing invasive treatments for no purpose. Of course, there can be a situation where there isn't a guarantee whether the methods will cure the illness, and then we do what we can. And we address the situation of the causes from the karma of previous lives, because whether or not there is an ability to address the illness now will depend on the strength or weakness of that previous life's karma. But we don't know what that is. We don't have a way of knowing whether the medical treatments, whether addressing the previous life karma will actually cure the illness. To the extent that we know that there will be a benefit, then we should do it. To the extent that the treatments won't actually address the illness, then we're in a situation where we need to accept it. If the illness is incurable, there's no point in undergoing difficult treatments. In that case, we can also consider, in either case, that even the suffering of illness has qualities to it. It's not absolutely unpleasant and nothing more. There are some positive qualities we can gain from that. For example, it serves as the opportunity to increase our confidence in karmic causality. And once we develop that confidence, that serves as the basis for developing reorientation of mind away from samsara as a whole. What's more, based on that reorientation of mind, our own experience of suffering, we're able to develop compassion for the countless numbers of beings in a similar situation. So as the Bodhisattva Shantideva says, even a suffering has many qualities. We can engender the enthusiasm for virtue, that is diligence, pacify pride, etc. There are any number of different qualities that come from the suffering. And so what we should do is engage in the practice in this way so that it serves as a way to actually nourish and expand our Dharma practice.
대념도 동len지나 대동양들이 계란기 동알디 냠닝기 또 첨부차 그래. 계란기 동알기 등도 시행기 동알량 렌 심진신 데르고 동알 용 먹어봐차 계란기 동알디게 군대 동알 용아 고체 어디로거든 동len기 미과제나 대동양 레립 다고에 점도 맞아 수능 초 가지 못 사그러. 어디 인사들이 잡버름 지기 동알디게 참말해서 동al gende chik 동al gewe kulmare sore 동al latene tagi shebana chidini ngejung ke lende le ichi ke gire simjene ningji ke gire lasogwa tididini kewala kulma che gire sore di 동al gende Tinza tunga la tene lesen de lengua ra labja nyamningi labja lengua yang dungal simgi genchare sore karse dungal la tene eni ngagel shigire dungal la tene thado shigire dungal la tene docha shigire ti docha meba ngagel meba thado meba di simgi genchare was genchare sore 이 동안을 때는 또 그래서 이 상마 삼라데 그냥 동안을 가게 그래 백이더니 파모도 배송하지. 근데 최시 거기는 동안 삼제 대화를 샤르송라. 디가서 그냥 동안 뒤에 라메 질라메가 서로 그래. 대령한테 서발라고 서봐. 동안 되게 희랑이 셈 두고 말해. 셈도 주고 동안 셈 주고 있어 봐라. 라마 서봐 말해 서봐.
So Patrul Rinpoche also says that we can use suffering as a way to address wrongdoing. We can see how it is that wrongdoing serves as our enemy when the causes of karma from previous lives yield unpleasant results in this one. We can see how it is that suffering actually spurs us on to practice, to expand our practice, to understand that any number of other beings are likewise experiencing this suffering, and it actually opens the door to expanding our practice if we don't let it cripple us through discouragement. In addition, we can even use this situation of our suffering as a basis for gathering the accumulations of merit in this way by expanding our suffering. So that's one of the qualities of suffering, if we're able to take advantage of it in that positive light. Another one is, as we just saw, the Bodhisattva Shantideva says, it inspires us to develop confidence in karmic causality, compassion towards other beings based on our own reorientation of mind away from samsara, and so forth. Any number of various kleshas are diminished as a result of it, and suffering can be the basis for having good advice for how to live, good advice for how to accomplish our Dharma practice. What's more, suffering can actually serve as an ornament that adorns the mind, that beautifies the mind. How so? Suffering can be the basis for diminishing arrogance, diminishing jealousy, diminishing attachment of any number of things. These diminishments in our kleshas serve to beautify and adorn the mind. And all of this is possible with suffering as the basis. When we understand suffering in that light, we can actually appreciate its value from that perspective. This is as the quote from Pagmo Drukpa I mentioned earlier says, if we take the right perspective, an accurate perspective, from all sufferings that we encounter, happiness arises. So we can actually extract the happiness that is our immediate experience out of the suffering, out of that perspective. We can even see it as a blessing of the Lamas, a way to engage in the practice of Zepa, patience or magnanimity. Zepa, not the Lama Zepa, but the Zepa that is the patience, means a mindset that is not troubled, that doesn't go into turmoil due to suffering. So that too is something that we can engender based on the experiences of suffering if we see it the right way.
Allah, that the
There's a sixth question as well. There's a new set of questions, and the sixth one I would like to address also. So the sixth question is, is there such a thing as collective karma of all beings? Is it possible that one person can choose a negative rebirth to purify the collective negative karma of other beings and free them from suffering?
Hola, that the Tumungile 투몽기 레 요래 말레스. 투몽기 레디 이 강사 찌기 정성나 근데 신자 상황이 냠도 정도 그래스. 디레도.
Lari.
네 투몽기 레 요래. 답변은 알아서 뇌기 직된 나에게 레디 투몽기 레라. 투몽기 레스도 그것들이 먼저 상황이 레 찍을 dom샤요. 디라 위험하라. 투몽기 레스는 먼저 레 소소소소 열어. 이네 레기 대부디 투몽도 난 거라. 데레 투몽기 레라로. 그러나서 뇌기 직된 나에디 먼저 나미 인자들이 미 개월인지 가서 다 뇌기 직된 미 요새 상황을 찍어낸 거라. 이네들이 먼저 상황 레디 냠도들이 미팅 전에 사요 말아. 컴플리 찍요 말아. 디사사. 소소 사라. 레디 소소 사네 레라. 텔라장도 애니 조인 제라다. 다디 디시게 가고도 나도 빼샤잖아. 나도 WhatsApp 그룹이어라. WhatsApp 그룹도 찍어라. WhatsApp 그룹 나한테는 냠도 여기 가서 드니 난속이다 메시지 단디 그래요네다 파일 그래요네 성화 쉐어 지그러는도. 찍을 나나 디 그룹 나 이거 성화를 낸 거라. 이 투몽이 레디 당도 레디 소소소 사고하면 상관 염두더니 사요 말아. 이네 레디 대부 능도 것도 상말아 투몽도 낸 거라. 디제던 투몽이 레라로. 디디더니 예디 소소소 길어요라. 사야디 소소소 사라. 디 장두에 소소소 장거로마도 지기 장두 탐제 장도예요 말아진다. 상계 세계도 상계도 것을 지딩 감기 나와디 말하고 나와디 매바 차로라. 지기 장 탐제 장도는 디 말에 투몽기 레스도 것들이 능에 투몽도 나게 투몽기 레라로 말도 사야 투몽도 사야 말에 장에 투몽도 장말 사야 소소소 사야 장에 소소소 장거 그는 가서 워터 그룹을 저들이 나랑게디 딜리트 제시나 나랑게디 그룹 내 떼잖아 나랑게디 워터 어카운트 이 날라디 năng 말아 디네 지금 나랑 아니 미 개월 얘기 드버 장소나 미 나와디 누브더라 그냥 나랑 시도도 가서 디네 미 내주기 나와디 누브더라 나랑이 레디 탈타라 이네 전다 미기 나와디 데데그라 이 거래에서는 상대 것도 소소 사열에는 정도 것에 소소 장거라 말이
Lari.
투몽도 라고 해야지 나의 투몽도 나게서 투몽이 레라고 그러면도 레 그런 냠도 루루 제셔요 말이다.
In this question, this phrase collective karma or shared karma is something that does exist. There is a shared or collective karma of beings that, for example, refers to the various experiences of the human environment that human perceives in the world. So all humans perceive the worldly environment in a shared or collective way. And this is a result of their shared or collective karma. But there is no such collective or shared karma in that all the karma gets clustered together in a big ball and it becomes one single karma for everyone. That's not how it works. That's not what is meant by collective karma. The karma is something that each individual being enacts and accumulates, but it is possible to share common results of karma, such as worldly experiences in the environment for all beings who take a human rebirth. We all perceive, we have a collective similarity in the way we understand and perceive the world. But that doesn't mean that all of the various karmas of each and every being is collected together and combined into a single thing that individual beings have access to. That's not how it works. The results are individual. It's hard to explain because this is a very detailed, complicated explanation, but we can use an everyday example of a group that somebody creates on our WhatsApp app on our phones. It's similar to that. Everybody in the group shares in the experiences of a message or a file that one person in the group shares to the group. One person shares the file or a message, and everyone in the group is able to experience that file. They see that in their cell phone. So that's more similar to what collective karma does. Nevertheless, the actual enactment of the karma, the experiencing of the results is individual. It doesn't get clumped together in a ball that everyone experiences at once. There is no common or shared result. Similarly, when we're speaking of either accomplishing the action, accumulating the karma, or purifying the karma, these two are also individual. It is entirely individual, not something that can be shared among others. For example, all of the karma of beings could have been purified at the time that the Buddha Shakyamuni was present in the world. But that's not how it works. The accumulation of the karma, the purification of the karma is individual, not shared or collective, even though there can be shared results of karma among, for example, humans experiencing different things in the world in a common way. So going back to our example of our WhatsApp group, if I delete myself from the group or get rid of my WhatsApp account, then I don't continue to see the files and the messages that the group members deposit in there. And that's like if at the end of this human life, I've deleted my human life existence for the moment, and the experiences of a human life have waned. They set at the time of death. But that doesn't mean that the experiences of human life have stopped for others. Others continue to have the shared experiences of human existence that I had during my life and that wane at the time of death. Similarly, our purification of karma, our accumulation of karma is individual, not shared or collective. When we speak of collective karma or shared karma in this approach, it's reflecting the shared results that some beings may have.
Hola, da drink de shagre. De dro chusum jibe give tawa di rangshi simjin tamje da tumo de de rangshi simjin tamje lo chuzu do chu lam do lam gi tuba se tuba yeshe su cherwe go ne sangi go wan to be che do mo da malam gi tamjer na ra shu.
We'll stop there for today. Now, please gather together all of the roots of virtue, all of the positivity, all the merit that has come from this listening to the genuine Dharma, and dedicate them to ourselves and all beings in a similar situation, that we and all beings may turn the mind to Dharma, the Dharma become our path, the path dispel delusion, and delusion arise as wisdom. And by means of this, may we all attain the level of Buddhahood. And please make the aspiration and dedication prayers that this may happen.
Janango.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Last
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the translators and interpreters and recorders. If the recorders will stop recording now.